That figure on the Starbucks logo, the one you've seen thousands of times without really looking. Most people assume she's a mermaid. Look closer. She has two tails. She's holding them apart, displaying herself. In the original 1971 design, before corporate sanitization, you could see her bare breasts and the full spread of her serpentine lower half. She's not a mermaid. She's a Melusine, a creature from French medieval legend. Half woman, half serpent, a monster who married a nobleman, bore him 10 children, most of them deformed, built him an empire, and then transformed into a dragon and flew away screaming when he discovered what she really was. And now she sells coffee to 3 billion customers a year. How does a medieval monster become a global brand? The answer takes us through 6 centuries of propaganda, political manipulation, and one of history's most successful reputation laundering operations. Because Melusine wasn't folklore, she was invented, commissioned, paid for by a duke who needed a founding myth for a failing dynasty. This is the story of how a noble family turned their darkest rumors into their greatest asset. Before we meet the serpent, if you believe the stories that power tries to bury deserve to be uncovered, if you want to understand how the powerful have always manufactured their own myths, subscribe to the Midnight Archives. Tonight, we're going to watch a dynasty build its own monster. Every lie they told, every secret they hid, every scream that echoed from the towers for 300 years. Welcome to the Midnight Archives. For 300 years, people reported hearing Melusine, not seeing her, hearing her. A terrible shriek that echoed from the towers of Lusignan Castle in western France. Guards reported it, servants fled from it, nobles recorded it in their personal letters as simple fact. The cry always meant the same thing: someone important was about to die. The accounts are remarkably consistent. A sound like a woman wailing, but wrong somehow. Too loud, too long, emanating from stones and empty air rather than any human throat. It came at night, usually. It came without warning. And within days of hearing it, someone in the Lusignan bloodline would be dead. In 1574, Catherine de' Medici, Queen Mother of France, one of the most powerful women in Europe, visited the ruins of Lusignan Castle. By then, the fortress had been partially demolished on royal orders, its towers torn down to prevent it from being used as a stronghold in the religious wars tearing France apart. But the foundations remained, the stories remained. According to contemporary accounts, Catherine heard the scream herself. She turned to her guides and asked what it was. Melusine, they told her, the fairy ancestor. She still mourns her children. Catherine left quickly. She didn't stay the night. Within a few years, she would be dead herself, though whether Melusine screamed for her, the records don't say. The people Melusine was crying for were the Lusignans, one of the most improbable dynasties in European history. They started as minor nobles in a backwater French province called Poitou. Not kings, not even particularly important counts. Just another family with a small castle and modest ambitions in a region most people couldn't find on a map. Within 2 centuries, they ruled Jerusalem. They ruled Cyprus. They ruled the Armenian kingdom of Cilicia. They married into every major royal house in Europe. The Plantagenets of England, the Capetians of France, the Holy Roman emperors. They punched so far above their weight that people started to wonder how. Started to whisper. Started to suggest that maybe the Lusignans had made a deal with something that wasn't quite human. Those whispers followed the family for generations. They couldn't outrun them. They couldn't disprove them. The more successful they became, the more people believed something unnatural was involved. By the late 1300s, the whispers had become a serious problem, and the Lusignans decided to do something about it. In 1393, a writer named Jean d'Arras received a commission from one of the richest men in France. Jean, Duke of Berry, was a prince of the blood, son of one king, brother of another, uncle to a third. He was also a legendary patron of the arts, the man who commissioned the famous Très Riche Heures illuminated manuscript, one of the most beautiful books ever made. He collected beautiful things. He employed the best artists and writers money could buy, and he had married a Lusignan princess. The Duke looked at the rumors destroying his wife's family legacy. He looked at the accusations of demonic ancestry that had followed the Lusignans for 200 years. He looked at a dynasty that was fading, losing its kingdoms, watching its reputation crumble, and he hired Jean d'Arras to fix it. The writer's job was simple: create an origin story, give the Lusignans an ancestor they could be proud of, transform the whispers of demonic blood into something else entirely. What Jean d'Arras created was Melusine. But Jean d'Arras didn't invent her from nothing. He took something that already existed, something people in that region had been whispering about for centuries, and he gave it shape. He gave it a name. He gave it a purpose. The raw material was already there, buried in local legend and older stories that stretched back before Christianity ever reached France. Stories about women who weren't entirely human. Stories about bargains made at ancient springs. Stories about what happens when a mortal man sees something he was never supposed to see. Jean d'Arras took those fragments and forged them into a weapon, a piece of propaganda so effective that it outlived the family it was meant to serve by half a millennium. To understand what he was working with, we need to go back to the fountain where it all began. There's a spring in Poitou, in western France, called the Fontaine de Soif, the Fountain of Thirst. It still exists. You can visit it today. The water is cold and clear, rising from limestone bedrock and pooling in a basin surrounded by ancient trees. It's quiet there, the kind of place where you can imagine the veil between worlds wearing thin. For as long as anyone can remember, long before Jean d'Arras, long before the Lusignans, long before Christianity, people in this region have told stories about what lives in that water. The spring has a strange property. No matter how much you drink from it, your thirst doesn't quite go away. You keep wanting more. You keep coming back. The fountain of thirst doesn't satisfy. It creates longing. Maybe that's just minerals in the water. Maybe it's something else. The local people have always believed it's something else. Before Christianity arrived in Gaul, the Celtic peoples who lived here organized their spiritual world around water. Springs were sacred, rivers were goddesses, pools and wells were places where you could communicate with powers that existed outside normal reality. The boundary between the human world and the other world grew thin at these locations, thin enough that things could cross over. Water spirits populated every stream and pond. Some were benevolent, many were dangerous. All of them operated by rules that humans didn't fully understand, and some of them took human lovers. The stories follow a consistent pattern. A man encounters a supernatural woman at a body of water. She's impossibly beautiful. She offers him something he desperately wants: wealth, power, children, love. In exchange, she asks for one thing: a promise, a taboo, a rule he must never break. Don't look at me at certain times. Don't ask where I go. Don't speak my true name. Don't follow me when I leave. The man agrees. Why wouldn't he? She's offering everything. For a while, the bargain works. The man gets what he was promised. The supernatural wife seems content. Children are born. Wealth accumulates. Life is good. Then the man breaks the rule. He always breaks the rule. This pattern isn't unique to France. It exists everywhere humans tell stories. In ancient Rome, there's Cupid and Psyche. The god of love takes a mortal bride, but forbids her from seeing his face. She lights a lamp while he sleeps. A drop of hot oil falls on his skin. He wakes, sees her betrayal, and vanishes. In Greek mythology, there's Orpheus and Eurydice. He's allowed to lead his dead wife out of the underworld on one condition: don't look back. He looks back. She's lost forever. In Scottish folklore, there are the Selkie tales. A man finds a seal woman's skin while she's bathing in human form. He hides it. She becomes his wife, bears his children, makes him happy for years. Then she finds the skin. She returns to the sea. She never comes back. In Japanese tradition, there's the tale of Urashima Taro, who marries a princess of the sea and is forbidden from opening a certain box. He opens it. 300 years catch up with him in an instant. The supernatural wife, the mortal husband, the forbidden knowledge, the inevitable betrayal. The shape of the story is so consistent across cultures and centuries that it must be touching something fundamental about human experience. Something about the impossibility of truly knowing another person. Something about the parts of ourselves we hide from the people who love us. Something about trust and surveillance and the fragile architecture of intimacy. Jean Darras didn't invent this pattern. He inherited it from thousands of years of human storytelling, but he did something new with it. In every older version of this story, the supernatural wife is a victim. She's the one who loses everything when the taboo is broken. The focus is on her tragedy, the mortal who couldn't be trusted, the paradise that was destroyed, the woman who vanishes back into whatever other world she came from. Jean Darras shifted the focus. In his version, the supernatural wife isn't just a beautiful victim. She's a builder, a founder, a creator of dynasties. Before she's discovered, before she's forced to flee, she constructs an empire. Melusine isn't the tragedy at the center of the story. She's the explanation for everything that comes after. Her sons will conquer kingdoms. Her castles will stand for centuries. Her bloodline will produce kings and queens across 3 continents. The monster becomes the mother of nations. That's not folklore. That's propaganda. And it was exactly what the Lusignans needed. The story begins with a murder. A young nobleman named Raymondin is out hunting in the forest with his uncle, the Count of Poitiers. They're tracking a boar, a massive, dangerous animal that's been terrorizing the local villages. The hunt has gone on for hours. They've become separated from the rest of their party. Night is falling. The forest grows dark around them. Then they see it. The boar, enormous and bristling, its tusks gleaming in the last light. The Count raises his spear. The boar charges. In the chaos of the attack, Raymondin's spear finds the wrong target. The blade meant for the boar plunges into his uncle's chest. The Count of Poitiers, one of the most powerful lords in France, dies in Raymondin's arms. We're told it was an accident. Maybe it was. The medieval mind understood that hunts were dangerous, that weapons sometimes went astray, that tragedy didn't require malice, but Jean d'Arras plants enough ambiguity that we're never quite sure. Was it really an accident? Or did something in Raymondine, some ambition, some resentment, some dark impulse, guide his hand? The text doesn't say. The uncertainty is the point. What matters is what happens next. Raymondin flees into the forest, terrified, his uncle's blood still wet on his hands. He knows what will happen if anyone discovers the truth. Accident or not, he's killed one of the most powerful men in France. His family will be destroyed. Everything he's ever known will be taken from him. He rides through the darkness, half mad with fear, until his horse refuses to go any farther. He's reached a fountain. It's midnight. The moon is bright enough to turn the water silver, and there, at the edge of the spring, 3 women are bathing. Raymondine freezes. The women don't seem alarmed by his arrival. They don't cover themselves or flee. One of them, the most beautiful, with hair like dark water and eyes that seem to hold depths he can't fathom, steps toward him. She speaks his name. She knows who he is. She knows what he's done. She knows he's a dead man if he returns to civilization. And she offers him a deal. "Marry me," she says. "Swear that you will never try to see me on Saturdays. In exchange, I will make you more powerful than you have ever dreamed." Raymondin, who has no other options, who is covered in his uncle's blood, who is alone in a forest with something that clearly isn't human, agrees. Why wouldn't he? He has nothing left to lose. The woman's name is Melusine. The next morning, Raymondin returns to the castle. He tells a carefully constructed story about the Count's death, a version of events that places all the blame on the boar, that makes Raymondin look like a grieving nephew rather than a killer. No one questions him. Why would they? Hunting accidents happen. Raymondin seems appropriately devastated. Within weeks, he's acquired his uncle's lands. Within months, he's married Melusine, in a ceremony attended by nobles from across France. She seems to appear from nowhere. No family, no history, no explanation for who she is or where she came from. But she's beautiful and clearly wealthy, and Raymondine isn't answering questions. And then the real transformation begins. Melusine doesn't just marry Raymondin, she rebuilds him. Castles appear overnight, literally overnight. Fortresses that should take decades to construct. The quarrying of stone, the hauling of timber, the labor of thousands of workers materialize between sunset and sunrise. Raymondin goes to bed with an empty plot of land and wakes up to towers and walls and battlements. La Rochelle, Parthenay, Vouvant, Mervent, Pont, Talmont, Château-Larchy. The great fortresses of Poitou, one after another, springing from the earth as if summoned by something that doesn't obey the laws of time and labor. Jean d'Arras is careful to describe how this looks to outside observers. They see construction beginning, they see workers arriving, they see the foundations being laid. And then they wake up one morning and the castle is finished, months or years ahead of schedule. Everyone knows it shouldn't be possible. No one can explain how it happened. After a while, people stop asking. These weren't fictional castles. Every fortress Jean d'Arras mentioned was real. You can still visit some of them today. The ruins of Vouvant still stand. The Tower of Melusine is a tourist attraction. By attributing their construction to Melusine, Jean d'Arras was claiming the entire built landscape of Poitou as evidence of the Lusignan fairy heritage. Melusine clears forests and drains swamps. She establishes markets and builds churches. The Lusignan domain, once a modest backwater, becomes one of the most prosperous regions in France, and she bears Raymondin 10 sons. The sons are not normal. Urien, the firstborn, has one red eye and one green eye, set in a face that's too short and too wide. He'll become king of Cyprus. Odin has ears so large they seem almost wing-like. He'll found a great family line. Guyon has one eye set higher than the other. He'll become king of Armenia. Antoine has a lion's claw growing from his cheek. He'll rule Luxembourg and Bohemia. Renaud has a single eye in the center of his forehead. Geoffroy has an enormous boar's tusk jutting from his jaw, an echo of the beast that set this whole story in motion. Framont is covered in fur from head to toe. Horrible, yes, that's his name, has 3 eyes arranged in a vertical line down his face. 8 sons, 8 monsters. Only 2 of them, Thierry and Raymonde, appear entirely human. If you're thinking this sounds like a description of real genetic conditions, hereditary facial abnormalities, unusual pigmentation, hypertrichosis, you're not wrong. Medieval people didn't have our vocabulary for these things, but they recognized that certain features ran in families. They just explained it differently. The Lusignans, according to later sources, did have distinctive features. Unusual eyes, prominent jaws, characteristics that made them recognizable across generations. The kind of thing that might attract comment. The kind of thing that might fuel rumors about unnatural origins. Jean d'Arras took those features and gave them a mythological explanation. The Lusignan sons aren't deformed. They're marked by destiny. The strangeness in their faces is proof of their supernatural heritage. And here's the thing. Despite their appearances, the sons are great. They become kings and conquerors. The deformities aren't curses. They're prophecies written in flesh. For years, the arrangement works. Raymondine gets richer. Melusine gets her family. The sons grow into warriors and rulers. The castles multiply. The legend grows. Every Saturday, Melusine withdraws to her private chamber. The door locks. No one enters. Raymondine has kept his promise faithfully. He doesn't ask questions, doesn't try to peek, doesn't let curiosity overcome the bargain that made him everything he is. Then, Raymondine's brother shows up. The brother's name is never given much weight in the story. He's a minor character, a catalyst rather than a protagonist. But what he does changes everything. He visits Raymondine's castle. He sees the impossible wealth, the supernatural construction, the wife who seems to have appeared from nowhere, the children with their monstrous marks, and he starts to wonder, where does Melusine go every Saturday? He asks. What kind of wife demands 1 day of total privacy each week? What kind of woman builds castles overnight and bears children with tusks and claws? He doesn't say the word demon. He doesn't have to. The implication hangs in the air between them. Raymondin defends his wife at first. He's had years of happiness. He's richer than he ever dreamed. His sons are carving out kingdoms across the known world. Why would he question any of it? But the seed is planted, and seeds, once planted, have a way of growing. The doubt starts small. A glance that lingers too long when Melusine leaves for her Saturday privacy. A restless night wondering what she's doing behind that locked door. A conversation with his brother that ends with more questions than answers. Raymondin has kept his promise for years. He's never tried to see her on Saturdays. He's trusted her completely, or at least, he's acted as though he trusted her, which in a marriage is often the same thing. But trust, once questioned, is hard to rebuild, and Raymondin can't stop wondering. One Saturday, he makes a decision. He takes his sword, the same sword that killed his uncle all those years ago, the weapon that started everything, and he goes to the wall of Melusine's private chamber, the room where she locks herself away every week, the room no one has ever entered. He uses the point of the blade to bore a hole through the stone, and he looks through. She's in a bath, a large copper tub filled with water that seems to shimmer with its own light. From the waist up, she's the woman he married, beautiful, familiar, the face he's loved for decades, the body he's held in the darkness of countless nights. From the waist down, she's something else, a serpent's tail, massive, coiling, covered in scales that catch the light like wet stone. It fills the tub, spilling over the edges, curling against the floor. The transformation starts at her hips, human skin giving way to something reptilian, something cold-blooded, something that has no place in a nobleman's castle. Raymondin stumbles backward. His heart is pounding. His hands are shaking. Everything he thought he knew about his wife, his marriage, his life, all of it suddenly uncertain. He repairs the hole in the wall. He doesn't tell anyone what he saw. He goes about his day as though nothing has happened. He keeps the secret. This is the part of the story that matters most, and it's the part most people miss. Raymondin sees Melusine's true form, and he says nothing. For months, perhaps years, he knows what she is. He knows the woman sleeping beside him transforms into a serpent every Saturday. He knows his children are half monster, and he stays. The marriage continues. The life they've built together continues. He looks at her across the dinner table, knowing what coils beneath her skirts, and he treats her exactly as he always has. They share a bed. They raise their remaining children together. They rule their expanding domains side by side. The seeing doesn't destroy them. So what does? One of their sons, Geoffroy à la Grande Dent, Geoffroy of the Great Tooth, does something unforgivable. Geoffroy is the one with the boar's tusk jutting from his jaw. He's violent, temperamental, famous for his rages. He's the most successful warrior of all the brothers, but also the most purely destructive, the one who seems to have inherited whatever darkness ran through the bloodline without any of the compensating virtues. He attacks a monastery, not just any monastery, the Abbey of Mylusine, one of the holiest sites in the region, a place where monks had prayed and worked and copied manuscripts for generations. And not just any attack, he burns it to the ground with everyone inside. 100 monks die in the flames. One of them is his own brother, Fromont, who had taken holy orders and devoted his life to God. Geoffroy has committed murder, sacrilege, and fratricide all at once. He's destroyed a house of God and killed 100 innocent men, including his own brother, because he was angry that Fromont chose prayer over war. When Raymondin hears the news, something in him breaks. He's in the Great Hall, surrounded by courtiers and servants, when he learns what his son has done. The messenger delivers the news without embellishment. The abbey burned, the monks dead, Fromont among them. Raymondin's grief is real. His rage is real, and in that moment of anguish, he forgets caution. He forgets the decades of secrets. He forgets that he's standing in front of witnesses. He turns on Melusine, his wife, the mother of his children, the source of everything he has. And he screams, "Away, odious serpent! You have contaminated my noble race. None of this would have happened without your false enchantments. You and your children have brought nothing but ruin." Serpent. He says it in public, in front of the entire court. He names what she is for everyone to hear. The word hangs in the air. Servants freeze, nobles stare. Everyone understands what has just happened. The Lord of Lusignan has called his wife a monster, and from the look on her face, he's not wrong. Melusine doesn't argue. She doesn't defend herself. She doesn't try to explain or justify or salvage anything. She doesn't weep. She doesn't beg. She doesn't ask him to take it back, to pretend he never said it, to let them return to the life they'd built together. That option died the moment the word left his mouth. She walks to the window, and as the court watches, servants, nobles, guards, everyone frozen in place, her body begins to change. The serpent's tail emerges first, splitting her gown, coiling beneath her like something waking up. The scales catch the torchlight, iridescent, beautiful in a way that makes beauty terrifying. Then wings unfold from her back, leathery and vast. Nothing like the angelic wings of Christian iconography. These are the wings of something older, something that existed before angels were imagined, before churches were built, before men learned to name things and think that naming gave them power. She grows larger, more terrible, filling the room with something that shouldn't be able to exist. The ceiling groans, stones crack, servants scream and flee. The nobles who had stood in judgment moments before now cower against the walls, watching the lady of the castle become something else entirely. She's no longer a woman with a serpent's tail. She's a dragon, a worm, a creature out of nightmare, barely contained by the castle walls. She flies through the window. The stones crack as she passes, the very stones she placed there, the walls she raised in a single night, now breaking beneath the weight of what she's become. She circles the castle 3 times, screaming in a voice that doesn't sound human, that couldn't come from a human throat, that seems to shake the foundations of everything Raymondine built. 3 circles. In medieval tradition, 3 was the number of completion, of binding, of curse. She's not just leaving, she's marking this place, claiming it, ensuring that her presence will never fully fade from these stones. Medieval illustrations of this scene show her enormous, filling the sky, her serpent's body coiling around the towers of the very castle she created. The same hands that built Lusignan are now wrapped around it in grief or fury or both. Some images show Raymondine at the window, reaching out. Whether to stop her or beg forgiveness, the artists don't say. Then she's gone, into the clouds, into legend, into the space between history and myth, where she'll live for the next 600 years. But she doesn't stay gone, not entirely, because Melusine left something behind. Children still in the nursery, a lineage that will continue for generations, a family that will still need her, even if they can never see her again. The nurses who tend to her youngest children begin reporting nocturnal visitations. They hear something entering the nursery after midnight. They see a shape bending over the cradles, dark against the moonlight from the windows. At first, they're terrified. They think it might be a demon come to claim the children of its own kind. They huddle in corners and pray. But in the morning, the babies are fine. Better than fine. Well fed, content, showing none of the fussiness that usually accompanies infancy. Someone has been nursing them in the night. Melusine, transformed, exiled, forbidden from ever returning in daylight, still comes back in the darkness to feed her children. The monster mother, driven out by her husband's betrayal, cannot stay away. She can't be a wife anymore. She can't sit at the family table or sleep in the marriage bed or watch her sons grow into men. All of that was taken from her the moment Raymondine spoke her secret aloud. But she can still be a mother, in secret, in shadow, in the only way left to her, and for the next 300 years people would hear her coming back. The nocturnal feedings eventually stop, the children grow, the nursery empties, life moves on. But Melusine's presence at Lusignan Castle never entirely fades. Guards report seeing a serpentine shape coiling around the towers on moonless nights. Servants hear weeping from empty rooms. And whenever a member of the Lusignan bloodline is about to die, witnesses report a sound that echoes from the stones themselves. A wail, a shriek, a mother's grief transformed into something terrible by centuries of exile. The legend says that Melusine can see the fate of all her descendants. She knows when they're going to die before they do, and she mourns them, every single one, across every generation, for as long as her bloodline persists. This isn't a fairy tale comfort. It's a haunting. The family she built, the dynasty she created, the children she bore in hope of happiness, she's doomed to watch them die, one after another, forever. Her immortality means witnessing endless loss. The parallel to the Irish banshee is striking. In Irish tradition, certain noble families had their own bean-she, fairy women who wailed before the death of family members. The banshee's cry was both terrifying and oddly reassuring. It meant your family was important enough to have a supernatural guardian. It meant your deaths mattered to something beyond the mortal world. Melusine serves the same function for the Lusignans. Her grief is their proof of significance. Think about what this does for the Lusignans as a political matter. Every other noble family in Europe has ancestors who were just people. Maybe impressive people. Maybe saints or warriors or kings, but still human. Their family trees terminate in ordinary births and deaths. Their lineages, however proud, are fundamentally mundane. The Lusignans have something else entirely. Their founding mother was a creature of supernatural power. She built their castles with magic. She blessed their bloodline with marks of destiny. She created their wealth, their status, their very existence as a political force. And she's still watching. She still cares. When a Lusignan lord dies, something that isn't human screams in grief. The family's losses are acknowledged by a power beyond the mortal world. Their sorrows have cosmic significance. The unusual features that other families might hide, the strange eyes, the prominent jaws, the characteristics that made people whisper about demonic blood, become proof of divine election. We look different because we are different. We came from something greater. This is brilliant propaganda, but propaganda needs a reason to exist. The Lusignans didn't commission Jean d'Arras because they were proud of their heritage and wanted to celebrate it. They commissioned him because they were desperate. By 1393, when the Romance of Melusine was written, the family's fortunes had collapsed. Cyprus was unstable, torn by internal conflicts, and vulnerable to outside powers. The Armenian kingdom had already fallen. The last Lusinian king of Armenia, Leo V, had died in exile in Paris in 1393, the same year Jean d'Arras began writing. Leo had spent his final years wandering the courts of Europe, begging for support to reclaim his throne. No one helped. He died forgotten, the last king of a lost Christian kingdom, buried in a French monastery far from the mountains of Cilicia. The French branches of the family were tangled in succession disputes, losing lands and influence with every passing decade. The Lusignans, who had once ruled kingdoms, were becoming footnotes, and those old rumors about demonic ancestry, they were still circulating, still damaging marriage prospects and political alliances, still undermining the family at every turn. Jean d'Arras was hired to change the narrative, to take the rumors that were destroying the Lusignans and transform them into something else entirely. The whispers said the family was descended from a demon. Jean d'Arras said, yes, they're descended from something inhuman, but not a demon, a fairy, a spirit of power and fertility, a supernatural mother who chose this family for greatness. The very things that made people suspicious became proof of the family's special status. The monsters in the bloodline became marks of destiny. The rumors became a founding myth. It was an act of alchemical transformation, turning lead into gold, shame into pride, weakness into strength. But to understand just how desperate the Lusignans were, just how improbable their rise and how catastrophic their fall, we need to go back to where it all started. To a battlefield in the Holy Land where everything went wrong. In the early 11th century, the Lusignans were nobody, minor French nobility with a small castle in a region called Poitou. They had some military reputation, they'd fought in local conflicts, served larger lords, done the things minor nobles do to survive. But there was nothing in their position that suggested they'd ever be anything more than regional players. Then the Crusades changed everything. In 1186, a Lusignan knight named Guy married Sibylla, Queen of Jerusalem. This was not a match anyone would have predicted. Jerusalem was the holiest prize in Christendom. Its throne was coveted by every major power in Europe, and somehow it ended up in the hands of a minor French nobleman whose family had been fighting over scraps of Poitou just 2 generations earlier. Guy de Lusignan became king of Jerusalem, not through inheritance, not through conquest, through marriage and luck and being in the right place when better men were dead. His reign was a disaster. In 1187, barely a year after taking the throne, Guy led his army against the forces of Saladin at a place called the Horns of Hattin. It was one of the worst military decisions in medieval history. He marched his men across a waterless desert in summer heat, ignored the advice of experienced commanders, and fought a battle on ground of Saladin's choosing. The Christian army was annihilated. Guy himself was captured. The true cross, the most sacred relic in Christendom, the very wood on which Christ had died, was lost to the Muslims. Within months, Saladin had retaken Jerusalem. The city that European Christendom had spent a century trying to hold was gone. Guy de Lusignan became a byword for failure. Chronicles of the period are scathing. He was blamed for ignoring advice, for marching into a trap, for losing the holiest city in Christendom through sheer incompetence. The disaster at Hattin would haunt the Lusinian name for generations. And yet, Guy should have been finished. He should have been remembered as the fool who lost the Holy Land. Instead, something remarkable happened. He bought Cyprus. Richard, the Lionheart of England, en route to the Third Crusade, had conquered Cyprus almost by accident. The island's ruler, a Byzantine rebel named Isaac Komnenos, had made the mistake of insulting Richard's fiancée. Richard conquered the entire island in a matter of weeks, then didn't know what to do with it. He sold it to the Knights Templar. They couldn't manage it. He bought it back. He sold it again, this time to Guy de Lusignan, freshly ransomed from Saladin's custody and desperate for a kingdom to rule. The Lusignans traded one lost kingdom for another, and this one they would keep. For the next 300 years, the Lusignans ruled Cyprus. They also married into the royal family of Armenian Cilicia, a Christian kingdom on the Turkish coast, and eventually took that throne too. Lusignan princes married Plantagenets, Capetians, Hohenstaufens. The family that had been nobody in 1100 was related to half the crowned heads of Europe by 1300. Success on this scale attracted suspicion. How did they do it? How did a family of minor French nobles end up ruling multiple kingdoms? The answer, obviously, was hard work, strategic marriages, and the chaos of medieval politics. But that's not the answer that satisfied everyone. People started saying the Lusignans had help. The rumors weren't subtle. Multiple contemporary sources mention whispers about the family's origins. Gerald of Wales, a 12th century chronicler, recorded that the Angevin dynasty, the Plantagenets of England, who were related to the Lusignans by marriage, were said to be descended from a demon. The story went like this. An early Count of Anjou had married a beautiful woman of unknown origin. She was perfect in every way, except that she always left Mass before the consecration of the host. The moment when, according to Catholic theology, bread and wine become the literal body and blood of Christ. One day, the Count ordered his knights to hold her in place during the consecration. The moment the priest raised the host, the Countess screamed, tore herself free, and flew out the window, taking 2 of her children with her. She was never seen again. Richard the Lionheart himself supposedly knew this story. He allegedly joked about it, saying his family came from the devil, and to the devil they would return. He may have been joking, but the fact that he felt the need to address it at all suggests the rumors were widespread. The Lusignans were connected to this same web of supernatural suspicion, same region, same network of marriages, same whispers. By the late 1300s, the Lusignan Empire was collapsing, but the rumors weren't. Enter John, Duke of Berry, one of the richest and most powerful men in France, married to a woman whose mother was a Lusignan. The Duke looked at his wife's family legacy. He looked at the accusations of demonic ancestry that had followed them for 200 years. He looked at a dynasty that was fading into irrelevance, and he decided to rewrite the story. The genius of Jean d'Aras's solution was that he didn't deny the rumors. He confirmed them. Yes, the Lusignans were descended from something inhuman. The whispers were right. The suspicions were justified. There was something in the bloodline that set them apart from ordinary mortals. But, and this was the crucial pivot, It wasn't a demon. It was a fairy. In medieval thought, this distinction mattered enormously. Demons were servants of Satan, enemies of God, creatures of pure evil. To be descended from a demon was to be damned. Fairies were different. They existed in a theological grey zone, supernatural beings who weren't necessarily evil, spirits of nature and the other world who predated Christianity. Melusine wasn't a creature of damnation. She was a creature of power. And her children weren't damned, they were blessed. But Jean d'Arras didn't work alone, and the theological problem he'd created required a more sophisticated solution. If Melusine was a fairy, a being outside the Christian cosmos, did she have a soul? Could she be saved? And what did that mean for her children? These questions mattered. They weren't abstract theology, they were political survival. If the Lusignan's ancestor was damned, then any rival could use that to challenge their legitimacy, their marriages, their claims to territory. The church could excommunicate them. Their lands could be confiscated. The next version of the story would have to address this. And it would transform Melusine from a political tool into something that could conquer all of Europe. 8 years after Jean d'Arras completed his Roman de Melusine, a poet named Coudret produced a second version of the story. His version was written in verse rather than prose, easier to memorize, easier to recite, designed for performance rather than private reading. It was commissioned by Guillaume VII de Parthenay, Lord of Parthenay, whose family had Lusignan connections through a different branch than the Duke of Berry. 2 versions of the same legend, produced within a decade, sponsored by different branches of the same extended family network. This wasn't organic folklore development. This was a coordinated media campaign, and Coudret added something crucial: salvation. Medieval Christianity had strict categories for supernatural beings. Angels served God. Demons served Satan. Humans had souls that could be saved or damned. But what about fairies? What about the spirits of springs and forests that people had believed in since before anyone could remember? What about beings that weren't evil exactly, but weren't quite aligned with heaven either? Coudret's version emphasized Melusine's Christian virtues. She builds churches, not just castles. Her children are baptized in the faith. Her sons go on crusades and found monasteries. She supports the work of salvation even though her own fate is uncertain. The text suggests, without quite stating, that Melusine might have a soul, that her marriage to Raymondin might have been her path to redemption, that through bearing Christian children and supporting Christian works, she might have earned something that pure fairies never could. This was theologically convenient. It let the Lusignans claim supernatural heritage without claiming damnation. They could be touched by the other world without being enemies of God. Coudret threaded the needle perfectly. The Lusignans got to keep their mystique without losing their souls. Then came the printing press. In 1456, a German translator named Thüring von Ringoltingen produced a German version of the Melusine story. This doesn't sound significant until you realize what else was happening in the 1450s. Johannes Gutenberg had just invented movable type printing. Melusine became one of the first bestsellers of the print age. The book was reprinted constantly throughout the late 1400s and 1500s, dozens of editions in German, plus translations into Dutch, Czech, Polish, Danish, Swedish, English, Spanish, Icelandic. It was one of the most popular secular texts of the incunabula period, the first 50 years of European printing. The Lusignan propaganda machine had originally aimed at a few noble courts in France. They'd hoped to rehabilitate the family's reputation among the people who mattered: kings, dukes, potential marriage partners. The printing press carried Melusine to taverns and merchant houses and peasant cottages across an entire continent. By 1500, everyone in Europe knew the story. Melusine had escaped the control of the family that invented her. She became something new, a symbol, a brand, a figure that meant a dozen different things to a dozen different audiences. For nobles, she was proof that aristocratic bloodlines carried supernatural power. For merchants, she was a figure of aspiration, the beautiful woman who offers wealth and status to anyone brave enough to accept her terms. For scholars, she was a theological puzzle. For ordinary people, she was simply a good story, romance and monsters and castles and loss. The specific Lusignan context faded. Most readers of the German or English or Spanish translations had never heard of the Lusignan family, couldn't find Poitou on a map, had no idea they were reading political propaganda from a failed dynasty. They just knew Melusine. And by then, the actual Lusignans were almost extinct. The last Lusignan king of Cyprus, James III, died in 1474. He was an infant. His mother, Caterina Cornaro, ruled as regent until Venice simply absorbed the island in 1489. The Armenian branch had been gone for a century. The French branches had married into other families and lost their name. By 1500, there were no more Lusignans. The family that had ruled Jerusalem, Cyprus, and Armenia, that had married into half the royal houses of Europe, had vanished from history. But Melusine was everywhere. She had become immortal, not through magic, through ink and paper and the strange alchemy of stories that outlive their tellers. Freed from her original purpose, Melusine transformed into something her creators never intended. Alchemists adopted her as a symbol. The marriage of woman and serpent, human and animal, civilized and wild. This spoke to the alchemical project of uniting opposites. The coniunctio oppositorum, the union of contrary principles, was the heart of alchemical philosophy. Melusine, with her dual nature, became an emblem of that union. Her serpent's tail represented the prima materia, the raw chaos from which all things are made. Her human half represented the refined spirit that imposes order on chaos. Together, they symbolize the transformation of base matter into gold, the philosopher's stone in female form. In alchemical manuscripts from the 15th and 16th centuries, you find Melusines coiling through the margins, sometimes as illustrations of specific processes, sometimes simply as decorative elements that invoke the mystery of transformation. Innkeepers hung Melusine signs above their doors. The twin-tailed woman became a marker of hospitality across Germanic Europe. You can still find old inn signs bearing her image in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Perhaps because her story is about welcoming a stranger, about the bargains made between hosts and guests, about the dangers of asking too many questions. Heraldic designers put her on coats of arms for families with no Lusignan connection whatsoever. If you wanted to suggest ancient, mysterious origins, if you wanted your family crest to hint at supernatural power without making specific claims, Melusine was available. She'd been detached from her original context completely. The original story was about power, how to get it, how to explain it, how to legitimize it. The later Melusine became about something more intimate, secrecy and exposure. What do you hide from the people who love you? What happens when they see it anyway? Raymondine's betrayal resonated beyond medieval politics. It became about trust, about privacy, about the parts of yourself you never show anyone, the Saturday self, the serpent's tail, the thing you're terrified someone will discover. By the 1800s, the political origins of the legend were completely forgotten. Romantic poets rediscovered Melusine as a figure of tragic love. The serpent wife became a symbol of women destroyed by men who couldn't accept them as they were. Goethe referenced her in his conversations and letters, fascinated by her liminal status between human and supernatural. Ludwig Tieck wrote about her. Franz Grillparzer wrote a play. Across European literature, she became an archetype, the woman whose true nature costs her everything, punished for being something other than what her lover expected. Feminist scholars in the 20th century would read her story differently still, as a parable about women's need for privacy and autonomy, about male anxiety over female mystery, about the violence men do to women who refuse to be fully known. Melusine had been propaganda, then she became a symbol, then a romantic tragedy, then a heraldic decoration, then a picture on an inn sign. She had one more transformation left. In 1971, 3 businessmen in Seattle were looking for a logo for their new coffee company. They wanted something nautical. The company was named after a character from Moby Dick, the first mate of the Pequod. They started looking through old maritime books and prints. They found a 16th century Norse woodcut of a twin-tailed siren, a Melusine by another name. They probably didn't know what they were looking at. They probably didn't know about Jean d'Arras or the Lusignans or the Fontaine de Soif. They just liked the image. Exotic, mysterious, vaguely maritime. They put a medieval French monster on their coffee cups. The original 1971 Starbucks logo is startling if you've only seen the modern version. The Melusine is fully visible. Her breasts are bare, her twin tails spread wide on either side of her body, held apart by her own hands in a gesture that's more pagan fertility symbol than corporate branding. Her navel is visible. Her face has a knowing, slightly unsettling expression. Not the serene smile of the modern logo, but something older, stranger, more aware of what she is. The whole image has a rawness to it, something ancient and strange, and not entirely appropriate for a coffee shop. It looks like something you might find carved into a medieval church, or printed in an alchemist's manual, or hanging above the door of a German inn 400 years ago. Because that's exactly what it was. The founders had pulled the image from maritime history books, not knowing they were reaching back through centuries of transformation to something that began as political propaganda for a failing French dynasty. But Starbucks was a small Seattle roaster in 1971, selling beans to hippies and coffee enthusiasts. Nobody cared what was on the logo. Nobody asked why a coffee company had chosen a bare-breasted serpent woman as their mascot. Then they grew. The redesigns came gradually, each one obscuring a little more. In 1987, when Howard Schultz bought the company and transformed it from a local roaster into a national chain, the logo was cleaned up. The Melusine's breasts were covered by flowing hair. Her tails were still visible, but less prominently displayed. The rawness softened into something more palatable for a mass audience. In 1992, the frame tightened further. The logo cropped at the Melusine's waist. You could still see where her tail split, but only just. Her expression became more generic, more welcoming. less like something that might transform into a dragon if you looked at her the wrong way. In 2011, Starbucks removed the outer ring entirely. The company name disappeared from the logo. Now it's just the face and a hint of the body, the crown, the hair, the suggestion of waves or fins. You can barely tell she has tails at all. You certainly can't tell she's a monster from medieval French legend who flew away screaming when her husband betrayed her secret. They kept her. They just hid what she was. Sound familiar? There's something darkly appropriate about this. Melusine's entire story is about hiding your true nature, about the parts of yourself you keep locked away, about what happens when someone sees the thing you've spent your life concealing. She asked for one day a week of privacy, one day when she could be herself, fully herself, serpent tail and all, without being watched. The rest of the time, she could perform humanity. She could be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the builder of castles and founder of dynasties. But she needed that one day. Now Melusine appears on billions of cups, and almost no one knows what they're looking at. Her serpent's tail is still there in the old designs, still implied in the current abstraction. But it's been cropped out of frame, hidden from view. She's still keeping her Saturday secret, only now it's every day, and the secret is from everyone. 3 billion customers visit Starbucks annually. Each one sees a medieval French monster transformed into a corporate mascot. She's achieved a kind of immortality, not the kind the Lusignains imagined when they commissioned her story, but immortality nonetheless. She outlived the family that made her. The Lusignains ruled kingdoms. She decorates coffee cups in those kingdoms' successor states. She outlived the meaning they gave her. No one looks at the Starbucks logo and thinks about dynastic propaganda or demonic ancestry accusations. She outlived meaning itself. She's been abstracted into pure image, pure brand recognition, a shape that triggers a Pavlovian desire for caffeine without any of the mythological weight she once carried. The woman who was forced to fly away screaming is now everywhere. Every airport, every mall, every highway rest stop, watching from windows with those stylized eyes. Is this victory or defeat? She's more famous than ever. More people see her face in a single day than saw it in the entire medieval period. By any measure of cultural penetration, Melusine in 2024 has achieved what Melusine in 1393 could never have dreamed. But no one knows her story. No one knows about the murdered count, the bargain at the fountain, the sons with their monstrous marks. No one knows about Raymondin's sword cutting through the wall. No one knows about the 3 circles around the tower, the scream that doesn't sound human. She wanted to be seen as herself, fully herself, serpent and woman both. She wanted to be loved despite what she was, or maybe because of it. Instead, she's been cropped, sanitized, and stripped of everything that made her terrible and sad and powerful. Maybe that's the last betrayal. Maybe after 600 years, she's still being hidden, still being made presentable, still having her true nature erased so that she'll be acceptable to people who don't want to know what they're really looking at. Let's count the lies. The Lusignains pretended they were descended from a fairy. That was a lie, or at best, a strategic reinterpretation of rumors they couldn't stop. They took accusations and transformed them into myths. They took weakness and called it strength. They looked at the whispers, destroying their family, and said, "Yes, it's all true." But you misunderstood. We're not damned. We're chosen. Jean d'Arras pretended he was recording ancient folklore. That was a lie. He was writing political propaganda for a wealthy patron. The ancient sources he claimed to be working from were vague at best, invented at worst. He wasn't a folklorist preserving oral tradition. He was a hired pen creating a product for a client with specific political needs. Coudrette pretended Melusine might have a soul, might be capable of redemption, might be something other than a demon in beautiful form. That was a theological convenience, designed to protect a dying dynasty from the spiritual implications of their own founding myth. He wasn't engaging in genuine theological inquiry. He was solving a political problem with religious language. And now, Starbucks pretends that the figure on their cups is just a friendly mermaid. That's a lie too, or at least a careful cropping of uncomfortable truths. They inherited an image without knowing its history, and they've been sanitizing it ever since, removing everything that made it strange and powerful and meaningful. Layer upon layer of fiction, each generation embellishing what the last invented. Each version further from whatever original truth, if there ever was one, might have started it all. But here's what's not a lie. The fear that made Melusine necessary. Every family has secrets. Every lineage has something that doesn't quite fit the official story. Strange features, unexplained success, rumors that won't die no matter how many generations pass. The Lusignans looked at their secrets and made them sacred. They took the whispers about demon blood and transformed them into proof of destiny. They took the features that marked them as different and called them marks of blessing. That's not unique to one medieval French family. It's what powerful families have always done. It's what nations do, what religions do, what any group does when it needs to explain why it deserves what it has. The myth is the lie that tells the truth about what power requires. And then there's the other truth, the one that made Melusine survive long after anyone cared about the Lusignans. Everyone has a Saturday self. Everyone has a version they don't let anyone see. A transformation that happens behind locked doors. A serpent's tail that they hide beneath their clothes and hope no one ever discovers. We perform humanity for each other every day. We present the version of ourselves we think will be loved, will be accepted, will be allowed to stay, and we keep the rest hidden. Melusine's tragedy isn't that she's a monster. Plenty of monsters in medieval literature are simply evil. They exist to be defeated, to be slain by heroes, to prove the virtue of the knights who kill them. Melusine isn't that kind of monster. She's a wife and a mother. She builds rather than destroys. She asks for so little, one day a week of privacy, a single locked door in a castle full of rooms. Her tragedy is that she trusted someone enough to ask for privacy, and he couldn't give it to her. Raymondin's tragedy is different. It's not that he saw the serpent. He could have lived with that knowledge. He did live with it, for months or years, keeping the secret even from his wife. Knowing what she was and loving her anyway. The seeing didn't destroy them. The speaking did. He called her serpent, in public, in front of the court. He took the private knowledge that had been theirs alone and made it everyone's business. The violation wasn't looking through the hole in the wall. The violation was naming what he saw, exposing what had been hidden, taking her secret and making it a weapon. There's something there about intimacy, about the difference between knowing your partner's darkness and using it against them, about what we owe to the people who trust us with their hidden selves. Raymondin didn't lose Melusine, because he discovered her secret. He lost her because he betrayed it. The Fontaine de Soif still exists in Poitou. The water is cold, the trees are old, the spring still rises from the limestone and pools in its ancient basin. If you visit, no one will tell you about Lusignan propaganda or Starbucks logos or the printing press explosion of 1456. They'll tell you that Melusine was seen there once, long ago, that she rose from the water on a moonlit night and spoke to a young man with blood on his hands, that she offered him everything he had ever wanted in exchange for one simple promise, that she built him castles and gave him children and made him one of the most powerful men in France, that she asked for only one thing in return. She asked him not to look. He looked anyway, and he spoke what he saw. And she flew away screaming, circling the tower 3 times, her voice carrying across the countryside in a sound that didn't belong to any human throat. And now, 600 years later, she's still hiding. Only this time, she's on your coffee cup, and you're the one who doesn't see her. The next time you're standing in line at Starbucks, look at the logo. Really look at it. See if you can find the serpent's tail in that abstracted, sanitized image. See if you can hear, beneath the hiss of the espresso machine and the chatter of the morning crowd, something that sounds almost like a scream. 6 centuries ago, a dying dynasty paid a writer to turn their shame into glory. They took the rumors that were destroying them and transformed those rumors into a founding myth. They made a monster into a mother. And she's still here, still watching, still waiting, perhaps, for someone to see her as she really is. The Lusignans are dust. Their kingdoms are gone. Their castles are ruins and tourist attractions. But Melusine endures, because that's what stories do. They outlast the people who tell them. They escape the purposes they were made for. They transform again and again, until no one remembers what they originally meant, until the propaganda becomes folklore, the folklore becomes literature, the literature becomes a logo, and the logo becomes what? A feeling, an association, a vague sense of warmth and caffeine without any of the centuries of meaning that created it. And maybe that's the real magic. Not the castles built overnight, not the serpent's tail, not the scream that echoed for 300 years. The real magic is that we're still talking about her. The real magic is that she found a way to live forever, even if she had to hide to do it.